It was just another evening at the Grand City restaurant where a young waitress named Lena worked. The place was known for its elegant atmosphere, the kind that made people lower their voices and straighten their posture. The chandeliers sparkled above every table, and soft jazz played through hidden speakers. Every corner smelled of roasted coffee and warm bread. For most people, it was a place to celebrate success. For Lena, it was a place to survive. She had been working there for almost a year. Every day felt the same. Smiles that weren't always real, endless trays to carry, and the sound of polite laughter that never reached her heart. But she was grateful. The job kept the lights on in her small apartment and helped her send money back home. Her hands were always tired, but she never complained. She had learned long ago that complaining didn't make life easier. It only made time feel longer. What made the restaurant special that night was the grand event being held in the main hall. Wealthy guests, dressed in glittering clothes, filled the room. Expensive perfumes floated in the air, mixing with the scent of wine and candle wax. Laughter echoed from the tables, and waiters hurried around like shadows, trying not to be noticed yet always ready. Lena moved among them quietly, balancing a tray of crystal glasses. In one corner of the hall stood a shining black piano. It wasn't there for decoration only. Sometimes hired musicians came to play it during special events. But tonight it sat alone. No one had touched it for weeks. Lena often looked at it while working. She loved that piano, not because it was beautiful, but because it reminded her of a part of herself she had left behind. Before life became so heavy, Lena used to play the piano at her school. She was good, really good. Music had been her safe space, her dream, her way of speaking when words weren't enough. But dreams cost money, and her family had none to spare. When her father fell sick, she sold the old keyboard she used to practice on and took a part-time job at a diner. From that moment, music slipped quietly out of her life, replaced by the sound of clinking dishes and tired footsteps. Now, every time she passed by that grand piano, her heart gave a small ache. Sometimes, when the restaurant was almost empty, she would pause near it and imagine playing again. But she never did. It didn't belong to her. It belonged to the kind of people she served, people who could afford to have dreams. That evening, the restaurant owner had gathered all the staff earlier for a short briefing. "We have important guests tonight," he said firmly. "A charity dinner. Everything must be perfect. No mistakes, no delays." His eyes moved from face to face, resting for a moment on Lena. "You're serving the front tables tonight. Be careful, they're high-profile guests." She nodded politely and went back to preparing the trays. As the evening began, Lena noticed one man among the guests who stood out. Not just because of his fine clothes, but because of how people reacted to him. Wherever he walked, conversations paused. Waiters moved quickly to clear his path. He was tall, sharp-faced, with silver hair and an expression that seemed carved out of stone. Everyone called him Mr. Dalton, a well-known millionaire and investor. He was the kind of man whose signature could change someone's life or ruin it. And he knew it. Lena had never met him before, but she had heard stories. Some said he was generous when he wanted to be. Others said he enjoyed reminding people of their place. She didn't care much for gossip. To her, he was just another customer, another person to serve politely and forget about. The hours passed smoothly. Guests laughed, clinked glasses, and enjoyed the expensive food. Lena moved quietly from table to table, refilling drinks, taking plates, and smiling when needed. She was careful with her steps, careful with her tone, careful not to disturb anyone. But deep down, she felt invisible, like a shadow in a room full of light. Then, during a short break, she passed by the piano again. The room had grown quieter for a moment. Most guests were busy chatting or looking at their phones. The music from the speakers had stopped, and the space felt strangely empty without it. The piano stood there, silent and perfect, its surface reflecting the golden lights from above. Lena slowed down and looked at it. Her hands itched. Just one note, she thought. Just one little note. She looked around. No one seemed to be watching. Slowly, she reached out and pressed a single key. The soft sound echoed through the room, gentle and pure. Something inside her stirred. Felt like breathing after holding it too long. She pressed another key, then another, her fingers remembering the patterns they once knew so well. The melody was light, simple, something she used to play when she was a child. She forgot where she was. She forgot about the uniform, the trays, the rules. For a few seconds she was free. But freedom doesn't last long in the world she lived in. What do you think you're doing? The voice cut through the air like glass breaking. Lena froze. Her fingers stopped moving. When she turned, Mr. Dalton was standing a few steps away, his cold eyes fixed on her. The entire table beside him had gone quiet. The other guests looked at each other, uncertain whether to laugh or stay silent. "I'm sorry, sir," Lena said quickly, stepping back. "I didn't mean." "You didn't mean?" he interrupted, his tone sharp. "That instrument costs more than your yearly salary. Do you think this is a toy for you to touch?" Her cheeks burned. She wanted to disappear. "I'm sorry," she said again softly, her hands trembling. "It won't happen again." "I should hope not," he muttered. "Next time, remember your job. You serve drinks, not music." The words hit harder than she expected. She lowered her eyes, nodded, and hurried away. Behind her, a few guests gave awkward smiles, pretending nothing had happened. But the silence lingered for a moment longer before the conversation slowly resumed. Lena went to the back room and stood by the sink, pretending to wash her hands though they were already clean. Her chest felt heavy. It wasn't the insult itself that hurt. It was the reminder of where she stood in life. No matter how hard she worked, people like him would always see her as the help. She took a deep breath, forcing back the tears. There was still work to do. She couldn't afford to lose her job over a few piano notes. When she stepped out again, one of her coworkers, an older waiter named Peter, gave her a sympathetic look. "Don't take it to heart," he whispered as he passed by. "That man insults everyone." She managed a small smile and nodded. But deep down, something had changed. The piano didn't look the same anymore. It wasn't just an instrument now. It was a mirror showing her everything she had lost and everything she still dreamed of becoming. As the night went on, Lena focused on her work, though her thoughts kept drifting back to that short, painful moment. She thought of her mother's voice, soft and encouraging, saying, "Never stop playing, no matter how hard life gets." She thought of the dusty music sheets still tucked in her old backpack at home. And she thought of the sound of those few piano notes echoing through the hall before being crushed by harsh words. Toward the end of the evening, the restaurant began to quiet down. Some guests had already left, while others lingered over coffee and desserts. Mr. Dalton was still there, surrounded by people who laughed at every word he said. Lena avoided his table as much as possible. She didn't want another confrontation. But once, when she passed by to refill glasses, she caught him glancing in her direction. His expression was unreadable, perhaps irritation, perhaps something else. She didn't care to know. After the guests were gone and the staff started cleaning up, Lena walked past the piano one last time. The lights had dimmed, and the restaurant felt peaceful again. She stopped for a moment and looked at the shiny black surface. Her reflection stared back, tired, quiet, but not broken. She whispered softly, almost like a promise, "One day, I'll play again." Then she turned off the lights, picked up her bag, and stepped out into the cold night. The city hummed around her, cars rushing by, people hurrying home. She walked slowly, the sound of her own footsteps filling the silence. Somewhere deep inside, the melody she had started earlier kept playing in her mind. Unfinished, waiting. What she didn't know was that fate had already begun to change its tune. The next morning came slowly, with gray clouds hanging over the city. Lena woke up early as usual. The small apartment she lived in was quiet, except for the sound of rain tapping softly on the window. She sat on the edge of her bed for a long moment, staring at the floor. Last night's incident replayed in her mind again and again. The voice, the stares, the embarrassment. She tried to shake it off, but the words still stung. She wasn't angry anymore, just tired. tired of being reminded of what she couldn't be. Still, she pushed herself up, got dressed, and tied her hair neatly before leaving for another long day at the restaurant. She always told herself that she had no room for weakness. Bills didn't care about pride, and neither did rent. When she reached the restaurant, everything looked the same. Polished floors, warm lights, the faint smell of coffee. Yet something inside her felt heavier. A few co-workers greeted her, but they didn't mention what happened. They had all seen it, of course, but no one wanted to bring it up. People in service jobs learned quickly how to move on from humiliation. It was part of survival. By noon, the restaurant was already buzzing with activity. Lena focused on her tables, trying to bury herself in work. But every time she passed by the piano, she felt a quiet pull, like a forgotten song calling her name. She avoided looking at it for too long, afraid that if she did, someone might notice the longing in her eyes again. Late in the afternoon, the restaurant owner, Mr. Harris, called her to the counter. He was a kind man in his 50s, always patient but strict when it came to rules. "Lena," he said in a calm voice, "I heard what happened last night." Her heart skipped a beat. "I'm really sorry, sir. I shouldn't have touched it. It won't happen again." He looked at her for a moment, then sighed. "I know you didn't mean any harm. You've been one of my most reliable employees. But you must be careful. People like Mr. Dalton, they don't always think before they speak." "I understand," she said quietly. He gave her a small nod. "Don't let it bother you. Some people can't see past money. But I've seen you work here for months. You've got more grace than half of the guests who come through that door." His words eased something inside her. She smiled faintly and went back to her duties. But what she didn't know was that Mr. Harris had seen the way her fingers touched those piano keys. With love, not carelessness. He had also seen the look on her face afterward, a mixture of pain and dignity. It stayed with him longer than he expected. That evening, the restaurant prepared for another big event. A birthday celebration for one of the regular patrons. The dining hall was filled again with elegant guests, laughter, and the clinking of glasses. Lena was assigned to serve near the piano section, the same spot where the insult had happened. She tried to act as if it didn't bother her, but every time she glanced at the shiny surface of the piano, her chest tightened. It wasn't fear, it was memory. Around 7, a sudden commotion spread among the staff. The musician hired to play that night had just called in sick. He wasn't going to make it. The atmosphere quickly grew tense. The guests were expecting live music, and the piano was a centerpiece of the evening. Without it, the room felt oddly incomplete. Mr. Harris rubbed his forehead in frustration. "We can't find a replacement on such short notice," he muttered to one of the supervisors. Lena overheard the conversation while clearing a nearby table. Something in her heart started beating faster. It was a crazy idea, but before she could stop herself, the words slipped out. "I can play," she said quietly. Both men turned to her in surprise. "You can play?" the supervisor asked, raising an eyebrow. Lena hesitated. "A little. I used to before I started working here." Mr. Harris looked at her thoughtfully. "You sure about this?" She nodded, though her hands were trembling slightly. "If it helps tonight, I'll do my best." There was a pause. He studied her face, then gave a slow smile. "All right, go ahead. Play something soft. It doesn't have to be perfect." As soon as she walked toward the piano, whispers began spreading among the guests. Some were curious, others confused. They remembered her as the waitress who had been scolded the night before. And among them, sitting at the far end of the room, was Mr. Dalton himself. He looked up from his drink and frowned when he saw her. "What is she doing there?" he muttered to the person next to him. "Didn't anyone tell her to stay in her place?" The person beside him shrugged awkwardly, unsure how to respond. Lena sat on the piano bench, her heart pounding. She took a deep breath, closed her eyes for a second, and let her fingers rest gently on the keys. The same piano that had embarrassed her yesterday now waited for her touch again. For a brief moment, she felt fear creeping in. But then, she remembered her mother's voice, soft, patient, full of belief. "Don't let the world silence your song," she had once said. So she began to play T first. The notes were soft and uncertain, like someone trying to remember an old language. But as her fingers found their rhythm, the melody began to grow. It was tender and emotional, carrying the kind of depth that comes only from someone who has lived through struggle. The chatter in the restaurant slowly faded. People turned their heads. The sound filled the air like sunlight after a storm. Lena didn't play for the crowd. She played for herself. For every morning she had woken up exhausted but hopeful. For every night she had gone to bed with her dreams tucked away. The music poured out of her like a confession, honest and pure. Mr. Harris stood by the counter watching in silence. He had seen many musicians play that piano before, but never with this kind of heart. It wasn't technical perfection. It was emotion, raw and real. Even some of the guests who had ignored her earlier now leaned forward, listening closely. Mr. Dalton, too, looked up. His expression shifted. The arrogance in his eyes began to fade as he watched her play. The sound reminded him of something distant. Maybe a memory of his mother playing when he was a boy, or maybe it was simply the power of truth in the music. Whatever it was, it made him uncomfortable, but also strangely moved. The piece lasted for only a few minutes, but it felt like time had stopped. When the last note faded, there was silence, not the awkward kind, but the kind that holds respect. Then, slowly, the room filled with applause. Guests stood up, clapping genuinely. Some even cheered. Lena looked up, startled. She hadn't expected anyone to react that way. Her face turned pink, and she gave a shy smile. Even Mr. Harris clapped with pride. "Well done, Lena," he said softly. But Mr. Dalton didn't clap. He just sat there, quiet, his expression unreadable. Then, after a long moment, he stood up and approached the piano. The applause died down as people noticed him walking toward her. The same man who had humiliated her the night before now stood a few steps away, looking at her differently. "That was unexpected," he said quietly. "Where did you learn to play like that?" Lena hesitated, unsure how to answer. "I just practiced when I could," she said softly. He nodded slowly. "It seems I misjudged you." She gave a small, polite smile. "It happens," she replied simply, her tone calm and respectful. Something in her answer made him pause. It wasn't arrogance. It wasn't bitterness. It was grace, quiet and unshaken. For a moment, the millionaire who thought he understood people realized how little he truly knew. Before leaving, he said in a low voice, "You've got real talent. You shouldn't waste it here." Then he turned and walked back to his table. Lena sat there, still processing what had just happened. Her heart was full not from pride, but from something gentler. The piano that once made her feel small had given her back her voice. The same keys that had brought her shame now brought her peace. When the night ended and the guests left, several people stopped to compliment her on the way out. One woman even asked if she performed anywhere else. Lena smiled and shook her head. "No, just here," she said. But inside something had changed. For the first time in years, she felt alive again. After closing, Mr. Harris walked up to her. "You did something special tonight," he said warmly. "Thank you." She smiled softly. "I should be thanking you for letting me play." He waved it off. Talent like that shouldn't stay hidden. As Lena walked home that night, the city lights seemed brighter. The rain had stopped, and puddles on the ground reflected the glow of passing cars. She wasn't thinking about Mr. Dalton's apology or the applause. She was thinking about the music, about how it felt to breathe again through her fingers. She didn't know what would come next, but for the first time, she wasn't afraid. The next few days at the restaurant felt different. Something had shifted in the air since the night Lena played the piano. Guests still came and went, waiters still rushed between tables, and the same old jazz played through the speakers, but the staff looked at her differently now. People whispered about what happened, though not in a cruel way this time. One of the kitchen helpers told her that a guest had posted a short clip of her playing on social media. "It already has thousands of views," he said excitedly. Lena laughed softly, thinking he was exaggerating. She didn't even have time to think about fame. Her focus was on her next shift and the long list of bills waiting at home. Still, she couldn't deny how much lighter she felt. For the first time in a long while, she looked forward to coming to work. Every time she passed by the piano, she smiled instead of avoiding it. Mr. Harris noticed the change too. He often gave her a quiet nod of approval whenever he saw her walking by. But not everyone was pleased. A few waiters joked behind her back, saying she was now the star of the restaurant. Though there was jealousy hidden in their laughter, Lena didn't mind. She had learned long ago not to take people's words too seriously. She was proud that she hadn't let fear silence her. One evening, as she was folding napkins before opening hours, Mr. Harris walked over with a thoughtful expression. "Lena," he said, "you remember that guest, Mr. Dalton?" She froze for a second. "Yes," she said quietly. "He called this morning," Mr. Harris continued. "Said he wants to make a reservation for tomorrow night. A private dinner for a few business partners. He also asked if you'd be working that evening." Lena didn't know how to react. Part of her felt nervous, another part curious. Why would he ask about her? Maybe he wanted to apologize again, or maybe it was something else entirely. "I'll be here," she said finally. "Good," the manager replied with a small smile. "And if he asks you to play again, I think you should. You've got a gift, Lena. Don't hide it." The next evening arrived faster than she expected. She dressed neatly, tied her apron, and checked her tables twice before the guests arrived. When Mr. Dalton entered the restaurant, the air seemed to shift again. He was dressed sharply, as always, but there was something softer in his expression this time, not as cold as before. He nodded politely when he saw her. "Good evening," he said. "Good evening, sir," Lena replied, keeping her tone respectful. Throughout the evening, she served their table carefully, avoiding unnecessary attention. The group was deep in business talk, discussing projects and investments. She caught bits and pieces of their conversation but didn't pay much attention. Numbers and deals were a world far away from hers. After the main course was served, Mr. Dalton glanced at the piano in the corner. "Do you play every night now?" he asked casually. Lena shook her head. "No, sir. Only when the manager asks me to." He paused for a moment, then said, "Would you play something for us tonight?" Her hands hesitated on the tray. She didn't know if he was being kind or testing her again. But when she looked up, she saw no mockery in his eyes, only genuine interest. So she nodded. "If it's all right with the manager," she said softly. A few minutes later, she sat at the piano again. This time she wasn't afraid. The restaurant lights shimmered softly, and the quiet hum of conversation faded as soon as she began to play. The melody she chose was slow and gentle, full of emotion but peaceful. Her fingers moved smoothly, confident but humble. It wasn't about showing off. It was about sharing a feeling, that quiet strength that comes from surviving difficult days and still choosing kindness. When she finished, the guests applauded politely, but Mr. Dalton clapped a little longer than the others. "Beautiful," he said. "You really have something special." She smiled shyly and thanked him before returning to her work. The rest of the night passed quietly, but before leaving, Mr. Dalton spoke to Mr. Harris. Lena didn't hear what they said, but she saw him hand over a business card and gesture in her direction. The next morning, Mr. Harris called her into his office. "You might want to sit down for this," he said, handing her the card. It had Mr. Dalton's name printed in gold letters, along with a phone number. "He wants to meet with you about something. Said it's an opportunity." Lena frowned slightly. "An opportunity for what?" "He didn't say exactly," the manager replied. "But from the way he spoke, I think it's about music. Maybe he knows someone who can help you." Lena wasn't sure what to think. Part of her wanted to throw the card away. She didn't trust easily, especially people who had once looked down on her. But another part of her whispered that maybe, just maybe, this was something meant for her. That evening, she sat by the window in her small apartment, staring at the card. The rain had started again, and the city lights blurred against the wet glass. She thought of her mother, who used to tell her that life had strange ways of giving second chances. After a long pause, she picked up her phone and dialed the number. "Mr. Dalton speaking," the voice said on the other end. "It's Lena," she said quietly. "You asked to meet?" "Ah, yes," he replied. "I'm glad you called. I wanted to talk about your music. Do you have some time tomorrow afternoon?" They met the next day at a quiet cafe not far from the restaurant. Lena arrived early, nervous but composed. When he walked in, she stood up politely. He smiled and gestured for her to sit. "I'll be honest," he began. "The first night I saw you at the piano, I thought you were just trying to get attention. But after hearing you play, I realized I was wrong. You've got real talent. You play with emotion, not just skill. That's rare." She looked down, unsure how to respond. Compliments made her uncomfortable. "Thank you, sir," she said softly. He leaned back. "I know a few people in the music business, producers, teachers, even a couple of sponsors who fund small artists. I could introduce you if you're willing." Her eyes widened slightly. "Me? But I'm not a professional musician. I haven't played seriously in years." He smiled faintly. "That doesn't matter. What matters is your heart. The rest can be learned." Lena didn't say yes immediately. She needed time to think. Opportunities like this didn't come often, but she also didn't want to get caught in someone else's plans. She had seen enough people use others for their own gain. "Let me think about it," she said. "Of course," he replied. "Take your time. Just don't let fear stop you." When she left the cafe, she felt both excited and confused. Was this the start of something new? Or just a brief moment of luck? She didn't know. But as she walked home, she couldn't help humming the tune she had played at the restaurant. The world felt a little wider than before. Over the next few weeks, she continued working at the restaurant. Occasionally, she played the piano when the guests requested it. People started recognizing her. Some would whisper, "That's the waitress who plays," while others took photos or recorded short clips. She didn't let it change her. She still greeted every customer with the same soft smile, still helped her coworkers when they were overwhelmed. But deep inside, her dream had awakened again. She began practicing at home on a small second-hand keyboard she bought with her savings. The keys were worn, some notes didn't sound right, but it didn't matter. Each evening after work, she sat by the window and played until midnight, letting her fingers rediscover everything they had forgotten. Sometimes she thought about how quickly life could turn. Just a few weeks ago, she had been humiliated for touching a piano. Now people were asking her to play. It reminded her that moments of pain can become doors to something greater if you keep your heart open. One night, as she was closing up the restaurant, Mr. Harris came to her with a proud smile. "You'll never believe this," he said. "A customer called today asking if you could perform for a small private event next month. They'll pay you for it, and quite well, too." Lena was speechless. "They want me to play?" "Yes," he said. "And I think you should. You've earned it." She stood there for a moment, her heart full. The world still scared her sometimes. The uncertainty, the judgment. But she was learning that courage didn't mean not being afraid. It meant showing up anyway. As she locked the restaurant door that night, she looked through the glass at the piano inside. Its surface gleamed under the soft lights, and for the first time, she didn't feel small standing before it. She smiled quietly to herself, whispering, "This is just the beginning." The rain had stopped, and the city lights reflected in puddles on the street as she walked home. She didn't know where her path would lead, but she knew one thing for sure. She would never stop playing again. The night of the private event came faster than Lena expected. It was her first time being invited not as a waitress, but as a performer. The thought alone felt strange. For years she had stood in the background, serving people who barely looked her way. Now, for one evening, she was the one people would be watching. The idea made her both nervous and excited. The event was being held at a small art gallery in the city. The walls were covered in soft lights and paintings, and in one corner stood a white piano, polished and shining. When Lena walked in, the host greeted her warmly. "We've heard about you," the woman said with a kind smile. "Everyone's been talking about the waitress with the golden hands." Lena blushed. "I'm just happy to play," she said simply. She wasn't used to attention. She still wore her modest clothes, her hair tied back the same way she did at work. She didn't have fancy jewelry or designer shoes, but she carried something better, quiet confidence. The kind that comes from surviving storms. As the guests began to arrive, she sat near the piano, waiting for the signal to start. The sound of laughter filled the room, and glasses clinked softly. It reminded her of all the nights she had spent serving people like these, watching from the sidelines. But tonight she was on the other side of the story. When the host finally announced her, Lena stood, gave a small smile to the crowd, and sat at the piano. The room fell silent. For a moment, she just looked at the keys. Smooth, white, and familiar. She took a slow breath and began to play. The melody she chose wasn't one of the classic songs people expected. It was something she had written herself. A piece born from long nights, quiet tears, and stubborn hope. It began softly, like a whisper, and then grew into something strong and full. Each note carried emotion, not sadness, but truth. As the music filled the gallery, people stopped talking. Even those at the back leaned forward to listen. The melody told a story, of struggle, of being unseen, of finding light again. And though she never spoke a word, everyone in the room understood what she was saying through her music. When she finished, there was silence, the kind that comes when people are too moved to clap. Then, one by one, the guests began to applaud. The sound grew louder, echoing through the room. Some even stood, smiling and nodding. Lena smiled softly, her hands still resting on the keys. She wasn't used to applause, but she accepted it with humble gratitude. Afterward, people came to talk to her, asking about her music, her background, and how she learned to play. She answered politely, keeping her story simple. "I just love music," she said. She didn't talk about the long nights at the restaurant or the man who once told her to stay away from the piano. Those details belonged to the past. But one person did mention him. "You know," a man said quietly, "I think I saw that video of you online. The one where you played at that restaurant. Wasn't there a businessman sitting nearby?" Lena smiled faintly. "Yes," she said. "He was there." What she didn't know was that the same man, Mr. Dalton, had received an invitation to the gallery event too. He arrived later that evening, after she had finished playing. When he entered, people were still talking about her performance. He overheard bits of their conversations. "Her playing gave me chills. So much emotion. Can you believe she used to be a waitress?" He stopped, listening. Something stirred inside him. He walked around the gallery, pretending to look at the paintings, but really he was looking for her. He finally spotted her near a small table, speaking with a group of guests. She looked different somehow, more alive, more certain of herself. When she noticed him, she gave a polite nod. He walked over, offering a small smile. "You played beautifully tonight," he said. "Thank you," she replied gently. There was a brief silence before he added, "I didn't realize how wrong I was about you that first night." She looked at him quietly. "You don't need to apologize again," she said softly. "Sometimes people only see what they want to see." He nodded slowly. "You're right, but I'd still like to make it right, if you'll let me." He went on to explain that he had spoken to a few people who could help her. A local recording studio that supported independent artists, a small music school offering evening classes, even a charity foundation that funded creative talents from modest backgrounds. "I'd like to sponsor you," he said. "No conditions, no contracts. Just a chance for you to do something with your gift." Lena was taken aback. For a moment, she didn't know what to say. She wasn't used to receiving generosity, especially from someone who once looked down on her. She searched his face for signs of pity, but there were none, only sincerity. "I don't want anything handed to me," she said finally. "I'm not handing you anything," he replied. "You've already earned it. I'm just giving you a door to walk through." She thought about it for a long time. The world had taught her to be cautious, but something in his tone felt genuine. Maybe this was what life meant by second chances, not gifts, but opportunities earned through perseverance. So she agreed to meet the people he mentioned. The following week, she visited the small recording studio. It wasn't a big place, just a few rooms with old equipment and friendly faces. But to her, it felt magical. For the first time, she sat in front of a microphone instead of a table full of dishes. When she played, the room filled with the same warmth that had once silenced the restaurant. The producer, a gentle middle-aged woman, smiled and said, "You've got something rare. You don't just play notes, you tell stories." Over the next month, Lena began recording a few of her compositions after her work shifts. She didn't quit her job yet. She wanted to keep her feet on the ground. But every night, after the restaurant closed, she stayed awake just a little longer, working on melodies, writing small pieces of music, and dreaming quietly of what might come next. One evening, she received a message from the producer. "We're going to post one of your recordings online. I think people need to hear it." Lena didn't think much of it. She had never imagined her music reaching beyond a few listeners. But within a few days, the video spread quickly. People commented about how deeply the song moved them. Some said it helped them through tough times. Others said it reminded them of lost dreams. The attention surprised her, but she stayed humble. She still woke up early, still served customers, still said thank you to every compliment. But people started recognizing her. A few came to the restaurant just to see the piano girl, as they called her. Mr. Harris couldn't stop smiling. "You're bringing us more business than the new menu," he joked one night. Even Mr. Dalton visited a few times, always sitting quietly, never trying to make a scene. He would just listen, watching her play with calm admiration. The man who once believed money measured worth now saw how wrong he had been. He had all the wealth in the world, but her music made him realize that true richness came from the heart. As weeks turned into months, Lena's world slowly began to expand. A few small performances followed, then interviews and even a local news feature about her journey from waitress to musician. Yet, through it all, she remained the same gentle, grounded person she had always been. When someone once asked her during an interview how she handled being insulted and humiliated before her success, she simply smiled and said, "If that moment hadn't happened, I might never have touched the piano again." Sometimes pain is the thing that wakes up your purpose. The interviewer nodded, visibly moved. And when the episode aired, thousands of people shared her story, calling it a reminder of how far kindness, patience, and persistence can go. Back at the restaurant, the piano stood as a quiet symbol of her journey. On nights when the dining hall was empty, she sometimes sat there alone, playing softly, not for fame or applause, but simply for peace. Mr. Dalton still visited from time to time. He never took credit for helping her. In fact, he often said she had helped him instead, helped him remember humility and the value of people beyond their titles or bank accounts. And as for Lena, she never forgot where she started. She continued to help others, mentoring young waitresses who had dreams of their own. "Don't hide your talent," she would tell them gently. "The world might overlook you for a while, but when it's your time, no one can ignore your light." That night, as she walked home under a sky full of stars, Lena smiled quietly to herself. She thought about the strange twist of fate that had turned humiliation into hope. She had no idea what tomorrow would bring, but she no longer feared the unknown. She had found her melody again, and this time, she wasn't letting go. Months passed like pages turning in a quiet book. Lena's life had changed, but in many ways, she was still the same person she had always been. She still loved small things: morning sunlight through the window, the smell of coffee at the restaurant, and the familiar sound of the piano keys under her fingers. What had changed was not her surroundings, but her sense of belonging. For the first time in years, she felt that her life was moving in the right direction. Her music had reached many people. Every week, new listeners discovered her story and left messages full of warmth and encouragement. Some said her songs gave them hope during hard days. Others said they played her music when they felt lost. It was strange to her to think that something that once lived only in her heart now traveled across the world, comforting strangers she would never meet. She didn't chase fame or fortune. All she wanted was to keep creating, to express herself honestly through her art. She had learned that success meant little if it took away your peace. So, even though she received offers from record companies and event organizers, she chose carefully. She wanted her journey to stay pure, without losing the sincerity that had brought her here. Mr. Dalton kept in touch, not as a businessman now, but as a quiet friend. He often checked on her progress and sometimes invited her to charity events where she could perform. Over time, people noticed how different he had become. He no longer spoke with the same arrogance. He listened more, smiled more, and treated people with kindness. It was as if her music had softened something inside him. One day, he told her something that stayed with her. "You changed how I see people," he said simply. "I used to measure worth by success, but now I see it's not about what someone has. It's about what they carry inside." Lena smiled at his words. "I didn't change you," she said. "You just decided to look deeper." He nodded and they both laughed softly. Their bond had grown into one built on respect. Two very different people who had learned something important from each other. Meanwhile, the restaurant where it all began had become a special place. People came not just for the food, but for the story. The piano, once a decoration no one touched, was now the heart of the restaurant. Some nights, Lena would return there after her performances, sit quietly, and play a few gentle tunes for the remaining diners. Mr. Harris always said the same thing whenever she walked in. "That piano missed you," he'd joke, wiping his hands on his apron. One quiet evening, after finishing her set, a young waitress approached her. She looked nervous, holding a small notebook. "I've been writing songs," she said shyly, "but I'm scared to show anyone." Lena smiled warmly. "I used to be scared too," she said, "but if you keep hiding your gift, it will fade away. You don't need to be perfect, you just need to start." The girl nodded, her eyes lighting up with courage. Lena recognized that look. It was the same one she had once carried, a fragile mix of fear and hope. That moment reminded her that every story begins quietly. No one sees the small steps, the nights of doubt, or the times you almost give up. But those are the moments that shape you. And now, she wanted to help others believe in themselves just as others had believed in her. In the months that followed, she began offering small piano lessons for children who couldn't afford music classes. Some of them came from tough backgrounds, much like hers. Their laughter filled her tiny studio, and she often told them, "Music isn't just notes. It's feelings that words can't explain." The local news covered her story again, this time focusing on her community work. People admired how she gave back instead of chasing glamour. But Lena never did it for attention. She did it because she knew how it felt to be unseen, and she didn't want others to feel that way. One evening, she was invited to perform at a grand charity gala. It was one of the biggest events of the year, attended by celebrities, business leaders, and musicians. The hall was massive, with a shining stage and hundreds of glittering lights. For a moment, standing backstage, she felt that familiar nervous flutter in her chest. But then she remembered the night everything changed, that moment in the restaurant when she had been humiliated for touching the piano. She thought of how far she had come since then, how every painful experience had quietly led her to this point. When she stepped onto the stage, the audience grew quiet. She took her seat at the grand piano, her fingers resting lightly on the keys. The lights dimmed slightly, and she began to play. The melody was slow at first, gentle and deep. It wasn't a performance to impress. It was a message from her heart. The music carried the story of her life, from struggle to hope, from silence to song. Each note felt like a memory, weaving through the room like soft light. People listened with complete stillness. Some closed their eyes, others leaned forward, captivated. And sitting in the front row was Mr. Dalton, his eyes filled with quiet pride. He knew that the woman on stage was not just playing music. She was sharing her truth. When the final note faded, there was a heartbeat of silence before the applause began. It was thunderous, filling every corner of the hall. Some people stood, clapping until their hands hurt. But Lena didn't bask in the attention. She simply smiled, bowed her head, and whispered a quiet thank you. After the event, reporters rushed to interview her. They asked about her journey, her struggles, and what message she wanted to share with others. Her answer was simple: kindness matters. You never know what someone is carrying inside them. Sometimes the quietest people have the loudest stories. Her words spread widely. The clip from that night was shared across social media, and people from all over the world commented on how her message touched their hearts. Teachers showed her story in classrooms. Musicians said her journey reminded them why they started. Ordinary people said they felt seen and inspired. But to Lena, the real success wasn't in the fame or recognition. It was in knowing she had made people feel something real. A few weeks later, she returned to her hometown for the first time in years. She visited the small house where she had grown up, the place where her mother had once taught her her first piano song. The house was quiet now, but she could still feel her mother's presence. Warm, encouraging, proud. She sat on the old porch steps, watching the sunset, thinking about everything that had happened. Life had tested her, humbled her, and lifted her, all in ways she could never have predicted. But she had learned something that would stay with her forever. That dignity, kindness, and belief in oneself were worth more than any amount of money or approval. A few days later, she performed a free open-air concert in her hometown park. Families, children, and even strangers gathered to listen. It wasn't a grand event, but it felt special. When she began to play, the sound floated through the evening air, blending with the laughter of children and the soft rustle of leaves. As she looked around, she saw faces filled with peace, joy, and hope. That was all she had ever wanted, to touch hearts. And in that moment, she realized she had come full circle. Later that night, as she packed up, a little girl ran up to her and said, "I want to play like you someday." Lena smiled, kneeling down to meet her eyes. "You already can," she said gently. "You just have to believe in yourself and never stop trying." The child hugged her, and Lena felt something deep inside, a quiet sense of completion. Her story, once filled with pain, had turned into something beautiful that could inspire others. And though her journey would continue, with new songs, new faces, new lessons, she knew one thing for sure: no insult, no hardship, and no moment of doubt could ever define her again. Because the girl who once was told she didn't belong at the piano had proven that every person has a melody inside them, one that deserves to be heard. That night, before going to bed, she wrote in her journal a single sentence that summed up her entire story. "Sometimes the things meant to break you are the very things that make you shine." She closed the book, smiled softly, and drifted to sleep. Not as the waitress who was once insulted, but as the woman who turned pain into music, and music into light.